Hello everyone and welcome to another comic book review. Today I'm going to be taking a look at Star Wars: The Rise of Kylo Ren by Charles Soule and Will Sliney. Our story begins with Ben Solo awakening in the wreckage of the hut where Luke Skywalker thought about murdering his nephew in his sleep per the events of The Last Jedi. Ben wonders why Luke did this before Force lightning comes down from the sky, which blows up the new Jedi Order temple. 3 of Luke's students return from a mission off-world right after the explosion and attempt to intercept Ben, but he wounds one of them and escapes. Young Solo then seeks out Snoke in the far reaches of the galaxy, with the Jedi students hot on his trail. So I won't get into my opinions on the sequel trilogy here, other than to say I don't care for them overall. I still enjoy The Force Awakens quite a bit. I like some things about The Last Jedi, but didn't care for it overall, and I thought The Rise of Skywalker was kind of a disaster. The constant highlight for me throughout all 3 of these movies, however, is Kylo Ren. I think he's by far and away one of the best new Star Wars characters that's been created in a long time, definitely the best of the new Disney era, and I think Adam Driver is a phenomenal actor. When I saw the announcement for this series before Rise of Skywalker came out, I was a little puzzled that we weren't going to delve into the backstory of this character that much in the films, but I was still excited to see the prospect of some exploration, at the very least, of this character's backstory somewhere. After all, the possibilities seem endless. This character's backstory poses so many questions that the films never answered. What kind of relationship did Ben have with his father? He tells Rey that Han Solo would have disappointed her as a father, but also says that he didn't hate him exactly. What sort of relationship does he have with his mother? In The Last Jedi, he can't bring himself to kill her, so he did have a positive relationship with her, maybe, I guess? What sort of student-master relationship did Ben have with Luke? Was it a positive relationship before Luke almost murders him in The Last Jedi, or was there friction before then? We know that Snoke had some sort of hold on Ben at the time when Luke had what he calls his moment of weakness, and that Palpatine spoke to Ben when he was younger in his head, but we don't know much else. Furthermore, what kind of Jedi Master was Luke Skywalker? In the old Expanded Universe novels, Luke breaks with old Jedi tradition and allows the Jedi of the New Order to do things like get married. Did he change things in this new canon? Did these altered teachings contribute to Ben Solo falling to the dark side? Also, what sort of student-master relationship did Ben have with Snoke before the events of The Force Awakens? What exactly are the Knights of Ren? How are they different from the Sith? How did Ben become their master at such a young age? What does being their master even mean? Because of how much I love Kylo Ren in at least the first 2 of the sequel trilogy films, I would really like to see these aspects of his character explored. I suppose it's not fair to expect this 4-issue miniseries to explore every interesting aspect of Kylo Ren's backstory, but I have to say, after reading this, I was left feeling a little underwhelmed and disappointed. Charles Soule is a writer I actually really like. I've read some of his work on Daredevil, X-Men, and She-Hulk, and really liked all that stuff. And I also thought his Lando Calrissian miniseries was just stellar. But I don't feel as if this story explored enough new things about Ben Solo as a character for me to give this a wholehearted recommendation. It's hard to say how much of this is Soule's hands being tied by Lucasfilm having plans for Kylo Ren and other things, or them just not knowing what they want to do with this character generally. But this series feels rather non-essential to me, which is disappointing. There are some plot developments in this series that are major moments in Ben Solo's life, I suppose. We learned that he wasn't actually responsible for burning down the new Jedi Order temple. We see him meet Snoke for the first time. We see him kill someone for the first time. We see him become the master of the Knights of Ren. And we see him build his red crossguard lightsaber in the final pages of the series. However, I felt as if these moments were a little undercut by a lack of exploration of Ben Solo as a character. Most of the interesting things that inform Ben's motivation for falling to the dark side in the first place are just glossed over. They're spoken about, but not shown, really. For example, this series is littered with flashback scenes from Ben's time as a Jedi student before the explosion of the Jedi Temple. These glimpses into his past really made me wish that we had a series focused on that stuff, and then eventually got to the post-Jedi Temple explosion stuff later. There's a scene of Ben speaking with one of his friends and fellow student at the Jedi Temple, where Ben says he feels an immense pressure to live up to the expectations that were put on him due to the circumstances of his birth and the name that was given to him. That's really interesting, but that's really all that the scene is. For most of this series, Snoke and the leader of the Knights of Ren talk about how Ben clearly has a connection to the dark side already. I just personally think it would have been more impactful to actually see how this resentment he has for the pressure put on him by being the heir to the Skywalker legacy informed his turn to the dark side, instead of that being established already by the time our story begins, with only a brief flashback scene where we're told how rough this has been on him to inform the character's transformation. There is also a flashback scene where Luke, Ben, and Lorsan Tekka go hunting for Jedi artifacts when Ben is a young Padawan. This is the only time that we get to see the master-student dynamic between Ben and Luke. Most of the scene is Luke talking about Jedi artifacts before the fight, Ben saying, "Yes, Master," and remarking that Luke is a great teacher in his head, while Snoke tries to convince him otherwise. Luke has a cool lightsaber fight with the Knights of Ren where he gets to be the true Jedi Master Star Wars fans really wanted to see in the sequel trilogy films. It was really cool to see, if not slightly depressing, if I'm honest, in that the only way to see in canon Jedi Master Luke Skywalker doing his thing is in a prequel tie-in comic. But this scene also didn't serve much of a character purpose for Ben. He's introduced to the Knights of Ren, and the Master invites Ben to join them should he ever wish to embrace the dark side, but that's really all that happens. I was left wondering, personally, what led Ben to the conclusion that Luke is a great teacher? I'd like to be shown scenes of that. The only other scene we get of Luke teaching students is him saying some stuff about how the Force is like a door that varies on how open it is initially for every person. I don't know, it just didn't seem very enlightening to me. It's just sort of generic Jedi Master speak, and the best Jedi Master's lessons aren't just about those kind of things. There's usually a deeper meaning about life behind them. I just think, personally, that exploring Ben and Luke's relationship could have given some real weight to the breakdown of that relationship later when Luke has his moment of weakness. If we were shown why Ben truly revered Luke as a teacher, I would have totally understood why Luke standing over Ben with murder in his eyes would have crushed him. I would totally buy that Ben was irreparably scarred emotionally after that moment. It would have been really tragic. As it stands, however, we don't get a whole lot between the two of them. It's just said in passing that Ben thought Luke was a good teacher in a flashback scene. Again, one of the primary motivations for this character falling to the dark side is left completely unexplored. For my tastes, the series does a bit too much telling us what Ben's motivations are rather than telling a story about them. What's actually focused on for the majority of the story is Ben Solo attempting to join the Knights of Ren after Snoke encourages him to take on a new identity. And I think Soule does some legitimately great writing with this stuff. Ben Solo does have a character arc in that he's more of a hardened killer by the end of this story. Until Ben Solo makes the decision to kill the leader of the Knights of Ren and take his mantle, most of the bad things that happen are either accidents or out of Ben's control entirely. It turns out he didn't burn down the Jedi Temple. The first person he kills is sort of by accident. His friend from the Jedi Temple gets killed by the leader of the Knights of Ren, etc. Ben is conflicted about the choices he has to make throughout the entire story until he makes the definitive choice to kill the leader of the Knights of Ren and become the Order's master. After making this choice, he has no issues killing the last of the Jedi students who were pursuing him, and he fully commits to the new Kylo Ren persona. This internal conflict he has about choosing the dark path is, of course, consistent with Ben's character, and his transformation into a person who has no issues killing people happens rather organically throughout the course of the story. I feel like I'm as conflicted as Kylo Ren is about this series, because the arc that Ben has in this story is done pretty well, and Soule has a great voice for this character. His Ben Solo feels entirely consistent with the one from the films. I could hear Adam Driver's voice in my head as I was reading through this. He just did a really good job in general with making this feel authentic to Kylo Ren's character. I think Soule would be a great choice to write a Kylo Ren or Ben Solo ongoing series that explores this character in a bit more depth, because I think he gets what makes this character tick and what's inherently interesting about him. However, this character's motivations for being disillusioned with his family, Luke, and the Jedi are the entire reason why he falls to the dark side, and it's just kind of glossed over here. To me, the rise of Kylo Ren is that story. The exploration of this character's damaged relationships with the people he was so eager to escape the shadow of. That to me seems like the meat of this character's backstory, the thing that drove him to become Kylo Ren in the first place. However, forgetting about all that stuff, I suppose, what's here, the arc that Ben has, it's well written, and Soule is obviously a very competent writer. The last thing I'll say about the writing before I move on to talking about the art is, for those of you who are hoping for a exploration of the Knights of Ren, as far as their ideology, their differences from the Sith, their backstory, anything of that sort, as far as I can tell based on this series and what we've gotten in the film, they're just a band of darkside users who call the dark side of the Force the Shadow. They're small in number, not all of them use lightsabers, and they demand that someone kill another person in cold blood without remorse in order to join their ranks. That's about all we get. I thought the art in this book by Will Sliney was absolutely superb. His action and dramatic skills are on full display here, as of course, Star Wars isn't just non-stop action. One of the reasons people love Star Wars so much is the people who inhabit the galaxy, their interpersonal relationships, etc. So you need an artist who can draw both dogfights, lightsaber battles, and the emotional scenes between the characters. This book is, after all, essentially the story of a lost boy taking his first steps on the path to becoming a mass murderer, and Sliney does a wonderful job capturing all of the emotional nuances a character journey like this requires. I think the thing that impressed me the most about his art, however, is that the characters that are in the films look exactly as I picture them in this book, but he doesn't ever get too photo-referency in a distracting way. He walks a fine line here very well that I've seen other artists who draw comics based on movie properties fail at walking before. I've seen artists draw comics based on movies where their style makes the characters look nothing like their film counterparts. And then I've seen other artists all but trace an image from a film into their art every time a character from said film shows up on the page. Sliney's Adam Driver likeness is spot on, but I also never feel like I'm looking at a repurposed facial expression from any of the sequel trilogy films either. It's great stuff. If Marvel and Disney put these two guys on a Kylo Ren or Ben Solo ongoing series, I'd be a very happy camper. Overall, I'm going to give a lukewarm, no pun intended, recommendation for Star Wars: The Rise of Kylo Ren. I suppose there's some canon essential plot developments for Kylo Ren in this series, but I'm personally hungry for a deep character dive for Ben Solo that's mentioned in passing a few times here, but not explored very much at all. I'd say that if you like Kylo Ren a lot, like I do, it's worth a read. I enjoyed reading this, but just know going in that you shouldn't expect anything more than the backstory of how Ben becomes more hardened, joins the Knights of Ren, and builds his lightsaber. That's pretty much all this series has to offer. So, if you've read Star Wars: The Rise of Kylo Ren, sound off in the comments below and let me know what you thought of it. If you haven't gotten the chance to check this one out yet, please let me know what you thought of my review. The feedback really helps me improve my videos. Alright, thanks for watching everyone, I really appreciate it, and remember, the Force will be with you, always.